Okay, my name is KindCruelty and welcome to another NTE video. In this video, we'll be going over 3 teams and their rotations for Shinku. But before we go there is some disclaimer. This footage was shot on the media server, so there will be some buffs such as Shinku's gaze. The stacks will not appear on the bottom, but they are there, and I will show you that they actually are there and they do work. And some text will be in Chinese. And I do know that Shinku did get some buffs, but these buffs do not change her rotation in any manner. The only changes that it does help is in the overworld, where you are farming bosses, where you can just be one punch man and kill mobs pretty easily. But now that we've got that through, let us go into the video. The first team we'll be going over is the Shinku, Hathor, Zero and the Nanally team. I know you're probably thinking, why not Jiyuan? Well, there is a team for team 2 where you can use Jiyuan, but Nanally is currently the best teammate for Shinku. And yes, I know there are 2 DPSs in the team, but Nanally is best because of her passive. Her cycle passive, it launches Vita buds per second, which works well with Shinku's passive with a cooldown of 1 second. So that synergy actually really works really well with Shinku and makes Nanally the best anima support for Shinku. We don't know if Eroi might change that, but for now, Nanally is currently the best. So for the rotation for this one, you will start off with Shinku. Now you want to build cycle with Shinku, and you can build the cycle either through her gaze or through auto attacks. Really, the choice is yours. I do not like staring at the enemy for some time before using my attack, but you can do this, especially at the start. And at 8 stacks, you will get around about half of her cycle filled. So you can do it at the start to just gaze at the enemy until you get those 8 stacks, and then you attack and build up the cycle. Once the cycle is filled, this is when you swap to Hathor. You then use your ultimate and then your E. I know this is unlike the usual rotation where you want to build up the feathers, but for here we just want to trigger the remora and keep things moving. So you go with Hathor, you Q and then you E, and then you swap to Zero. With Zero you repeat that, you Q and then you E. Now you've got the cycle ready for Zero. When you swap to Nanally, you then trigger the Blossom and you're going to trigger the charge, because when you swapped from Shinku to Hathor with that fill cycle, you would have triggered the Remora. So now that you're triggering a Blossom, you will trigger charge as well. Now we are ready to swap to the Shinku. Once we swap to the Shinku, then we can use her ultimate, and then we can auto attack until her skill changes form and is ready for the advanced form. Then you use it whenever it is off cooldown, and then you auto attack until Q's Crimson Judgment is ready. Once the Crimson Judgment is ready, you press on it and then she will do the Dragon Flame Verdict. After that, you then rinse and repeat. For the second cycle of her rotation, she will not have her ult. So as you are attacking during this period, you will have built up a cycle, then you will swap to Hathor again, then you will swap to Hathor again. Her ult might not be ready, you just skill, swap to Zero, you skill, swap to Nanally, you skill, then you swap back to Shinku to build up the cycle and start everything again. At that point, once everything starts off again, once her cycle is filled, her ult will also be ready. You then repeat the rotation. Now we shall go on to our second team, which is the Shinku, Hathor, Zero and Jiyuan. This is a team that most people will prefer because the Jiyuan does give some grouping in case you are dealing with a lot of mobs. So for this team, the rotation doesn't really change. It still follows the same flow because you are trying to activate the charged before you can ult. So you start things off with the Shinku. You can wait a few seconds until you've got 8 stacks of her gaze, and then use your skill and then attack. You build up the cycle. Once the cycle is filled, you swap to Hathor, you Q and then you E on the Hathor, and then you swap to Zero, you Q and then you E on the Zero. Then you swap to Jiyuan. At this point, you should be triggering Blossom and Charge, because your initial swap from Shinku to Hathor should trigger the Remora, and then the swap from Zero to Jiyuan should trigger the Blossom and the Charge. At this point, you should be ready to swap to Shinku and then use your ultimate. You auto attack on her ultimate until her E is ready. You use her E whenever it is off cooldown. You auto attack again, and if you are lucky and you do get some parries off, you can get the second E in before Crimson Judgment is then ready. You then press on Crimson Judgment and then she will do the Dragon Flame Verdict breath attack, and that is the rotation. After this, she will be off cooldown and her cycle will be more or less full. At this point, you can swap to Hathor. Her ult will not be ready. You can use the E to swap to Zero. You can use the E to swap to Jiyuan, use the E, and then you're back to Shinku to build the cycle again, of which her ult will be ready this time, and Hathor's, Zero's, and Jiyuan's ult will be ready for you to be able to repeat the rotation again. Last but not the least is the budget team, and the budget team, it's not that Skia is any weaker than Hathor. In fact, some people could argue that Hathor does give you the second remote application without your cycle being full and all that. But yes, this team uses Shinku, Skia, Zero, and Mint, and this is a budget team that only uses Shinku and Zero as 5-star characters. And the rotation is rather much the same. You start with Shinku, you build your cycle, whether you build it through gaze or build it through auto attacks, it really is up to you. Once the cycle is full, you swap to Mint, and at this point you trigger Remora. Then you swap to Zero, you Q, and then you E, and then you swap to Skia. When you swap to Skia, at this point you should be triggering the Blossom and the Charge, which will then enable you to be able to swap to Shinku. Once you swap to Shinku, at this point you can now use her ult. Once you use your ult, you auto attack until the skill is off cooldown. Whenever the skill is filled and it is off cooldown, you can use it. And if you do get some parries on or some dodge counters, you will be able to get that skill again. It might not always happen, but sometimes it does happen. Then you use that skill again. At that point, Crimson Judgment should be ready, which is her ult. Then you press on her ult, her Q, and then she will do the Dragon Flame Verdict. And that will be the rotation. Then you can then repeat the rotation, but the second flow of the rotation will have them without their ults, of which Shinku should have her cycle filled up. If she isn't, you auto attack a bit and then you get the cycle. You swap to Mint, you use the E, you swap to Zero, you use the E, you swap to Skia, and then you use the E. At this point you should be triggering Charge again. Then you can swap to Shinku and refill her cycle, and her ult should be filled at this point for you to restart the rotation all over again. And that is Shinku. Her rotation is quite simple, her playstyle is quite fun, and she is very strong. She has some really nice fast clears that you can do if you build her up well and you give her all the proper stuff. But yes, I know there's been a lot of discussion about her, about how weak she may be or about how strong she is, but I actually find her to be quite strong. If you pull on Shinku, you will not struggle to clear endgame in any sense of the manner. She is quite a strong DPS. And that is it for the video. For more content like this, leave a like and subscribe, and I shall see you on the next one.
Right now. Target confirmed. Spin and clear.